If you can harness the attention and focus of these kids, their task management abilities, bring up their executive functioning skills, but also retain their inherent awareness of themselves, they can grow into incredibly effective adults, Hi everybody, welcome back to Project Happy Home. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I'm Tanya, a doctor, lawyer turned homeschool mom of 3 kids ages 9, 6, and 4. My eldest has ADHD, and I started a series of videos a couple years ago just talking about my journey through becoming more aware of what ADHD was, how best to parent my son, how best to guide him into adulthood, and teach him all the skills that he needs to learn to become an awesome young adult. My friend Danielle over at Danielle Gets It Done is collaborating with me this week on today's topic, which is executive functioning. And she has a son with ADHD who's a little bit younger than mine. So it is really worth it for you to go ahead and check out her channel as well, because as I've said many times, if you've met one child with ADHD, you've met exactly one child with ADHD. And it really does help to hear different perspectives from different moms, because our kids are all different, we're all different, the way we approach things might fall within the same umbrella of good and helpful, constructive encouragement, but hearing different perspectives is always very helpful. So after watching this video, be sure to check the description box down below and head on over to Danielle's channel to check out her video as well. So today's topic is executive functioning, but before I get into that, I just want to review with you really quickly what exactly ADHD is in terms of being a neurobiological disorder. Why do we call it a neurobiological disorder? It's because it has many components that are going on at the same time. One of the main things that's happening is that you have a delayed maturation of certain areas of the brain, in particular the prefrontal cortex, which is at this front part of your brain, which acts almost as a conductor of sorts. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that does a lot of the organizing and directing, the same way the conductor in an orchestra might do. It has been observed that in children with ADHD, the prefrontal cortex can be a little bit delayed in maturation. So you might have a 10-year-old who has the prefrontal cortex development of a 6 or 7-year-old. And when they react to the world and their brain has to orchestrate different reactions to stimuli, it really does react in a more immature fashion. Another biological thing that's been observed in children with ADHD is an imbalance or a malfunction of the neurotransmitters in the brain. The neurotransmitters in the brain act like little signal packets, almost like little messages that go from one nerve ending to another and just signal like what's going on to our brain so that we can pass these signals along. If you have an imbalance of the neurotransmitters or an impaired sort of functioning of them, the way they are transmitting these messages, you can have delayed reactions to things, you can have immature responses, etc. You can have atypical responses to situations, all of which are things I think that the average parent of a child with ADHD has observed already. Now basically, ADHD has been classified into 3 different types, and that is the inattentive type, the hyperactive type, and the combined type. My son actually falls squarely within the combined type, so he exhibits symptoms of hyperactivity as well as inattentiveness. And the reason I just say that is because a lot of times your child may only exhibit signs of inattentiveness, and oftentimes in those children, ADHD as a diagnosis can be missed. So just be aware of the fact that, it really does present differently in everyone. If you're saying to yourself, well, my child never acts hyperactive, they never bounce around, they have no problems controlling their body, that doesn't necessarily rule out ADHD. And the inattentiveness can be due in large part to a lot of the things I just mentioned, this delayed maturation of the prefrontal cortex especially. If you're interested in learning more about how ADHD is actually diagnosed, I talk about that a bit more in my last video in this series, which I will link up above, and I discuss how the gold standard of evaluation for ADHD is basically 3 tiers. It's a neuro, psycho, and educational evaluation of the child, and should be a comprehensive evaluation so that you can get the best picture of what actually is going on with your particular child, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and how you could best address them in a multiple different ways. So getting back to the point of today's video, what is executive functioning and why should you care? The reason you should care is because a lot of the things that have been bothering you about your child, that have been worrying you about your child's behavior, probably fall within this umbrella of executive functioning. And by that I mean if you've noticed your child not being able to pay attention, not being able to follow through with certain tasks, not being able to take care of their own personal hygiene, being able to take care of their homework, knowing where things are, return library books on time, keep track of different pieces of a toy or a game, talking back, being disrespectful, not having the impulse control to protect themselves from dangerous situations or to not react too strongly to a friend or a parent reprimanding them, being just in general scattered or disorganized or just unable to control their emotions, their focus, their attention. All of these things kind of fall within what we call executive functioning. So what is executive function? Executive function is basically an umbrella term used to cover a whole variety of skills involved in organization and self-management. So when you have a child who can't remember that when they get up, they have to brush their teeth, put their clothes on, make sure their homework's in their backpack, put their socks and shoes on, and get in the car, that is a type of executive functioning deficit organized around the task area of executive functioning. There are some people who actually believe that ADHD in general should be described as deficits in executive functioning instead of deficits in attention and hyperactivity differences. So the 6 areas of executive functioning that are said to be impaired in children with ADHD are as follows. They are task management, or the activation part of the brain, that signal that now it's the time to do something. 2, attention management or focus, which is where you are involved in a task, and even though it might not be your favorite thing in the world to do, you need to stay, attentive to it throughout the process. For example, with homework. 3 is effort or effort management, where you want to sustain the energy throughout the task. So not only maintain focus, but sustain the energy throughout it. Have you noticed sometimes that your child becomes incredibly tired while doing something they're not particularly interested in? That's a deficit in that effort management area of the brain. 4 is emotion management, and that is just modulating your own emotional response to things. I think almost every ADHD parent can relate to this. It's one of the most hidden symptoms of ADHD in a while. Sometimes our children reserve that for where they feel the safest, which is at home. Sometimes their response to ordinary reprimands, gentle, corrections can be extreme and violent and out of proportion to whatever a parent or teacher has said. Sometimes their reaction to a friend or some sort of altercation on the playground can be extreme. That falls within that emotion management category. 5, you have information management, and that is working memory, the ability to access memory, to access things like multiplication facts, or to remember that I have a project due in 2 days, so I have to work on it, that type of memory. And 6, you have action management, and that is actually being able to monitor and inhibit and regulate your own actions. So sometimes our children with ADHD can be very physical with their reactions to things. They can also, fling things in anger and stuff like that. They can take off and run in a direction that might be unsafe. They might forget how their body is moving in space. They might forget that they're playing with a younger child, etc. That action management, having control of one's body, being able to sit still in a chair in class, etc. I'll go over each of these in a little bit more detail now, but just to reiterate, you have these 6 categories. You have task management, you have attention management, effort management, emotion management, memory management, and action management. So just to go into them in a little bit more detail so you guys can understand what we're talking about here. When we're talking about task management, we're talking about the ability to prioritize and organize your task list. So this is your to-do list for the day. This is one of the reasons why kids with ADHD respond really well to having visual cues, some sort of checklist, something to give them an external task manager. That doesn't necessarily have to be you nagging them all the time. So with littler kids especially, I really recommend the use of, visual calendars, visual cues, a checklist, a dry erase list, some sort of pictorial chart or magnet chore list, something that they get to move and see every day, that they see when they wake up. For my son, it's right on his bulletin board in his room, and it lists out, wake up, make your bed, go to the restroom. For a while when he was little, it even said things like flush the toilet, because he would always forget that. So I would just add it to the list. And so even if he came back to his room, he could remember, he could see it and go back and do it. And that way he wasn't reprimanded for something that truly wasn't his fault that he couldn't remember. That is something that is going on neurobiologically that makes it hard for him to have that inherent task management. So these external tools like checklists can help reinforce that and make it into a habit for them and lay those patterns down in their brain for them in an external reminder way, so that they get better and better and better at it. And I'll tell you, after 2 years of doing that with visual cues and stuff, my son is the best at the morning now. He does his morning tasks better than his more neurotypical sisters, better than I do, better than his father does, certainly. He just gets it done. It is so automatic for him. So scaffolding him in that way really helped him build his own mental patterns, his own emotional pattern for doing that in the morning. So sometimes I hear parents say, I don't want them to have this artificial thing all the time. They have to learn to do it themselves. They have to just know how to do it. An artificial help like a checklist or visual cues can help cement that for the child, so that after a certain amount of time, this becomes automatic for them. So a lot of these deficiencies though, or differences that we talk about in executive functioning areas, can also have a positive side. In terms of task management, not being so tightly roped into a first this, then that scenario makes our children often be able to be spontaneous much more easily than those of us who are more type A. So be alert and keep your eyes open to the pro sides of their different brain wiring as well. The second area of executive functioning we were talking about was attention management or focus. Now that is probably one of the things that I hear the most about, especially in terms of homeschooling a child with ADHD, which we do. And that is that children with ADHD can have real difficulty focusing on the task at hand, particularly if it's a boring task at hand, like grammar or multiplication, or learning geography facts, or what have you. And part of life is doing that. Part of life is being assigned work that might not be your favorite thing to do. And the ability to do the work is really important. The con is that they really have a difficult time focusing on something they're not interested in. The pro side of that is oftentimes they are seeing things that we don't see. They have their eyes open to everything but the homework assignment. They also have a real ability to enjoy the moment when they are enjoying themselves. If you've heard ADHD parents, a lot of them will say that when this kid is given the opportunity to be happy, they are happy. They are not the kid complaining about their socks or the fact that it's too hot or whatever. They're like, I see a trampoline. I'm gonna have the best time ever on this trampoline. Trampolines are the most amazing thing. So that's a pro side of that too. When they're very interested in something, they are on task, they are focused. But when they're not, we do have to work with them to scaffold how to build up their attention skills. The third executive functioning area that we talked about is effort management. And that goes hand in hand, right, with the attention, being able to keep your energy level up, even if you are focused on the task, even if you are present mentally, even if you want to do the homework. There's this just lethargy that descends sometimes upon my son. He just cannot do another math problem. And that is something that you have to work on as well. One of the things that I found works really well with that for homework, by the way, is the manila folder trick. And I will show that in a different video if you guys remind me in the comments down below. But basically, you just get a regular manila folder, put the worksheet or whatever homework assignment they have inside it. You cut the manila folder, the front half of it, into thirds. So the front of the manila folder has 3 flaps, and you just open one flap at a time. So the child only sees a third of the page at a time, and it just makes it seem a lot more doable. And it doesn't seem like a whole, page of problems or a whole page of writing, just a little part, and then another little part, and another little part. And psychologically, mentally, that can really help sustain their effort for the process. One of the pro sides of that, of that inability to sustain effort and sometimes an accompanying slow processing speed, is that they are more careful and that they can walk through things more carefully. They can also stay really alert to their self-care, to the need for rest, to the need to pull back a little and take a breather, to maybe go outside, to take a walk, to take a brain break. They can be really aware of those things. If you can harness the attention and focus of these kids, their task management abilities, bring up their executive functioning skills, but also retain their inherent awareness of themselves, they can grow into incredibly effective adults, who stay aware of their own need for self-care, of their own need to take a break, their own need to take a step back from a situation, but also maintain energy and focus. So that's the goal here. The fourth thing of executive functioning that we talked about was emotion management. And emotion management can kind of be summed up in 2 words, and that is short fuse. They have a short fuse. They fly off the handle. They get upset in terms of tears and sadness very quickly. They get angry very quickly. That anger can turn into sadness and frustration and I want to run away, and all of this very quickly. It can become a very dramatic situation. The pro side of that is that they're very in touch with their emotions. The negative side of that is obviously that it drives everybody else crazy, and it actually gives them an inaccurate portrayal of reality, right? You need to be able to respond to criticism and to suggestions and to differences of opinion with a modulated response. And that is something that I think is very challenging for parents with ADHD, because nobody has probably pushed our buttons more than our child who has ADHD. So we are not often coming at them with this modulated response that we want them to have. We often fly off the handle and act upset and crazy and just bleh at them. And that does not model the behavior we want them to develop. So I think learning about this prong of executive functioning was really important for me personally, because it is my best reminder to modulate myself, to model the behavior I would like to see when it comes to regulating your own emotions, to not take the things that my son says or reacts to as personally as I am often wont to do. So when you see your child fly off the handle, when you see your child freak out, resist the temptation to go to that place with them. You stay the calm place. You stay solid and steady. There is no reason to make them feel less. There's also no reason to tolerate it, however. I think that asking how you can help them, telling them that maybe at this stage you might want to remove yourself from the room with everybody else and take a break, take a breather, go outside or go up to your room, take a breath, take some moments to calm yourself down, and then come back to us. We love you. Come back to us in a moment. But take a breath until you can become more respectful, until you can calm yourself down. I think that's a really important thing to teach kids. If you start to feel out of control, I suggest modeling that. Sit down on the floor, cover your eyes, try the tapping that some people do. Take a breath. One of the things that I find my son finds helpful is to clench every single muscle in your body, just make yourself a little angry, ball of energy, and then relax it slowly, and then just give your body a signal okay, I have felt all these feelings. I am letting myself grit every single muscle, and I'm going to let it go. I'm going to feel my body, let it go a little bit. I think translating that emotion into a physical action, sitting on the floor, going to a quiet space, clenching all your muscles, something like that is really helpful for kids to shift from one emotional state to another. The fourth prong that we talked about is information management or memory management, and this one can be super annoying, because this is the one where you tell your child to go take a shower, and then in 5 minutes you tell your child, have you gone to take a shower? And the child's like, what? You never said that. And sometimes they can get mad at you because of the last prong, the emotion management. In the memory management, being able to remember, I told you 10 times to put your homework in your backpack, and now we're at school and your homework isn't in your backpack. That remembering to do something, that remembering that an instruction has been given, that is super frustrating to not only parents, but also the child, because I think when they hear it, they have every intention of remembering it, of doing it, of getting there, but it just doesn't happen. This can be one of the most difficult pieces, but I think for us, what has worked is to tie in memory management with physical motion when it comes to facts to remember and things like that, but to also tie it to the rest of the day, to tie things to an action that has to happen. So if he has to put something in his backpack, instead of just telling him once, I will put it literally like where his shoes are so that it automatically is like a visual cue for him. In terms of remembering isolated tasks, tying them to other tasks that have to get done is one little trick to make them remember more easily. A pro side of this inability to hold on to memory and to different little aspects of the day, is that they really do forgive very easily, don't they? At least my child does. He is so willing to forgive his siblings and me and his friends for little minor altercations, things that he blew up over like a few minutes ago. He is willing to let them slide right on through his memory. So that's a great, great skill, and something that I think the rest of us work our whole lives to achieve. The sixth area of executive functioning that people often break out for us is that of action management. And that is monitoring, controlling, inhibiting our actions. It's not just about maintaining your body in a single spot. It's not just about keeping your body in a chair during a classroom session or something. It's also about deciding when to act and when not to act. When to open your mouth, when not to open your mouth. That impulse control that I was talking about before, when a parent is scolding you and you're thinking your disrespectful thoughts, when to actually say them and when to not. And in general, you're not supposed to. But I don't know about you guys, but my son has very poor impulse control when it comes to saying all these things out loud. Right now, he's turning into a preteen, and that, preteen hormonal shift combined with the ADHD lack of impulse control is making for a lot of disrespectful talk. It is harder to find a pro in this area, but one pro side of this is that you are more willing to take risks. There is a reason that a lot of people who have started some of the biggest companies in the world today, like Tesla or Apple, are people who have ADHD, people who can think new thoughts, have this, fearless sort of action-taking ability where they just sort of leap, and there is a real pro to that, right? For society at large. As our kids are growing in our house, though, I think that it is our responsibility to teach them to make safe decisions, to try to take a breath before they act, to understand that although they have difficulty with impulse control, it is an important thing to work on, to practice, to exercise so that you can get there. Speaking of exercise, actually letting them have more physical motion is one way of engaging that type of energy, and one way of taming that part of executive function is by giving them that outlet in a positive way. I hope this was helpful to you guys. Understanding that ADHD is as much a deficit in these executive function areas as anything else really gives you a window into different ways to helping your kid. Because if you can parse out within these 6 categories areas where you see the need for improvement or the need for a little bit of practice to get better, parse out what you can do little by little. Go over the behaviors you see with your kid. What kinds of things are action issues, impulsivity issues? What kinds of things are emotion issues? What kinds of things are task management issues, attention issues, effort management issues? And kind of piece out how can I approach this? When I see this behavior, I'm seeing a deficit in executive functioning here. How can I best support him or her here? That is a much healthier and much more helpful way of approaching our children than simply saying, they're such a brat, I cannot handle this, they don't pay attention, they don't stay focused, they fly off the handle at everything. Seeing this as okay, we have a neurobiological thing going on here. This particular task or this particular type of attention is difficult for them. How can I make this better? How can we work together to facilitate improvement? Think of it like a workout regimen or a way of practicing these skills. You're not looking to improve everything overnight. You're not looking for the magical chart that will make your kid completely get their morning routine, together by the next week. You are really looking for little steps, little helpful things that you can do, like a visual cue chart, like timers during homework, like color-coded folders for homework, like putting things, in line with other tasks that have to be done, like vitamins next to your toothbrush, things like that, that can scaffold and build these skills little by little over time to lay these habit tracks down for your kid over time. so that within the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 years, you have done everything you can to smooth the way for your kids into adulthood so that they can manage all these executive skills with greater ease and efficiency as an adult. So you're not looking for the quick fix. You're looking at these things so that you can react with compassion and helpfulness as opposed to just anger and frustration. So as always, you guys, I really appreciate your time. Be sure to check out my friend Danielle's video. I'll link it up above and down below. And I wish you the very best day.